What if the most painful goodbye of your life was never meant to be the end? What if that last kiss, the one that left your chest hollow and your hands trembling, was actually a shield disguised as heartbreak? Tonight, you're going to witness a love story built on sacrifice, tested by danger, and nearly destroyed by secrets that hid behind silence. He walked away not because love faded, but because destiny knocked at the door with consequences from a past he thought he had buried. She believed she had lost her eternal love, until she realized the goodbye felt too intentional to be real. And when she decided to chase the truth instead of the pain, she stepped into a world where love becomes leverage and regret becomes fuel. Before this story ends, you'll see a staged farewell, a dangerous confrontation, and a moment where running away could mean survival or permanent loss. So stay with me, because sometimes the kiss that feels like the end is actually the beginning of everything. And if stories about destiny, courage, and love under pressure move you, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a romance, it's a battle for eternal love. I'll tell you how it really starts, not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a quiet room where two people pretend they still have time. He stood by the door like the door was a judge, and the hallway outside sounded louder than it should. Every tiny noise felt like destiny clearing its throat. She tried to smile, that brave little smile people wear when they're about to break, and he hated himself for noticing how her lipstick looked too perfect for a goodbye. There are moments where love doesn't leave, it just gets forced out, like a man being pushed from his own house in the rain. And if you've ever had to act calm while your heart is sprinting in your chest, you already know the kind of regret that grows before anything even happens. He wasn't leaving because he stopped loving her. He was leaving because loving her was becoming dangerous, and that's a brutal kind of sacrifice. So he swallowed the truth the way people swallow bad news, slow, shaky, and pretending it won't tear them apart later. She asked, "Are you sure?" And he didn't answer right away, because certainty is expensive when your soul is already in debt. He looked at the little table by the mirror, keys, a hair tie, a half-empty perfume bottle, and he knew those ordinary things would become memory landmarks. That's what people skip when they tell breakup stories. The way the room itself becomes a witness, the way the air becomes heavy like wet cloth. He thought of the first time he kissed her, how he'd been nervous and stupid and happy, like a kid who found a secret door to a better life. Now he was older, and the kiss was still the door, but it led to pain instead of possibility, the kind of twist destiny loves to pull. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her breath change, and he realized he was about to give her a last kiss that would haunt him. If you want the real truth, it wasn't romance in that second, it was survival, the heart's desperate attempt to leave something behind. He put his hands on her face gently, like she was made of glass, and he kissed her as if time could be convinced to pause. That kiss wasn't quick or polite, it was hungry and trembling, full of the things he couldn't say out loud because saying them would make him stay. Her fingers clutched his shirt, and in that grip you could feel her bargaining with the universe, like, "Please, not this, not now, not us." You know what's cruel? People think the last kiss is the end, but it's actually the beginning of the longest part, the after. He tasted her lipstick and thought, absurdly, "I'll remember this forever," and immediately hated himself for being right. That's the secret nobody tells you. Love doesn't die fast, it becomes memory, it becomes routine pain, it becomes a quiet roommate in your chest. And even while he kissed her, regret was already setting up its furniture inside him like it planned to live there permanently. She whispered, "Don't go," but she didn't say it like a command, she said it like a prayer, and prayers are hard to refuse. He almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because life has a nasty sense of timing. Right when you find eternal love, it tests you. His mind raced through the reasons, the phone calls he couldn't explain, the trouble following him like a shadow, the promise he'd made to keep her safe. Sometimes destiny isn't a magical plan. Sometimes it's just consequences finally arriving, and they don't ring the bell, they kick the door. So he chose the kind of sacrifice that looks cowardly from the outside, but feels like bleeding from the inside. He told her the line people hate hearing, "You deserve better," and the room went cold, because she didn't want better, she wanted him. And right there, in that silence, he realized love can be the strongest thing you feel, and still not be enough to stop the world. She turned away, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand like she was angry at her own tears, and he felt smaller than he'd ever felt. There are details that burn into you. The way her shoulders shook once and then went still, the way the lamp made her shadow look lonely on the wall. He noticed her ring on the dresser, simple, worn, real, and it hit him that objects don't move on, they just keep score for memory. That ring wasn't expensive, but it carried a whole relationship inside it, like a tiny planet holding all their seasons. And he thought, this is how goodbye becomes permanent, not with fireworks, but with one small thing left behind. If you're listening and you've ever had to walk away from something good, here's the practical truth. Don't underestimate the weight of small reminders. Because later, one random glance, at a ring, a photo, a scent, can summon regret so fast it feels like time travel. He took one step toward the door, then stopped, because his body still believed in eternal love even when his brain said, leave. She didn't chase him, she just stood there, staring at the floor, like if she looked up she'd shatter into 1,000 pieces. He wanted to be brave, but bravery isn't loud. Sometimes bravery is walking out while your heart begs you to stay. He whispered, please don't cry, which is the dumbest thing people say, because tears don't ask permission, and pain doesn't negotiate. Still, he said it because he needed to believe he could soften the blow, like words could cushion the fall of destiny. And when he finally crossed the threshold, it wasn't the hallway that felt dark, it was him, carrying the whole night inside his chest. But here's the hook you won't expect. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because someone else had already decided what their goodbye would cost. The door closed behind him, but the sound didn't echo in the hallway, it echoed inside his ribs. He walked down the stairs like a man leaving a courtroom, already sentenced by his own destiny, even though no judge had spoken. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should, like the city itself knew this wasn't just a casual goodbye, it was a fracture. He didn't look back immediately, not because he was strong, but because he was afraid that one more glance would undo his entire sacrifice. You see, people romanticize courage, but they rarely talk about the trembling hands, the shallow breathing, the nausea of leaving your eternal love behind. He reached the sidewalk and finally exhaled, as if oxygen had been on hold since that last kiss. And that's when the real war began, not between him and her, but between him and his own regret. He started walking without direction, because when your heart is broken, maps don't make sense. The streetlights stretched long shadows in front of him, and he felt like he was chasing a version of himself that still believed in happy endings. Every step felt heavy, like he was dragging the entire apartment with him, the ring on the dresser, the scent of her perfume, the taste of that last kiss. That's the detail most people skip. You don't just leave a person, you carry their memory like invisible luggage. And the mind is cruel, it replays moments on loop, zooming in on tiny details you wish you hadn't noticed. The way she whispered, "Don't go." The way her fingers tightened. The way silence swallowed everything after. He knew right then that regret wasn't coming later, it was already walking beside him. Now here's what nobody knew, not even her. This wasn't a dramatic breakup fueled by ego or boredom, it was calculated pain, the kind that smells like necessity. He had received a call hours earlier, a voice calm, threatening, deliberate, reminding him that some choices don't belong to you anymore. Sometimes destiny isn't fate written in the stars, sometimes it's a consequence of past mistakes catching up at the worst possible time. He had built a life before her, reckless, ambitious, dangerous, and though he had changed, the past hadn't forgotten him. The only way to protect her was to disappear from her world completely, to make her believe love had simply faded. And so he chose the ugliest form of sacrifice, letting her think he stopped loving her. If you've ever had to protect someone from yourself, you know this feeling. It's like holding fire in your hands while smiling so they don't see the burn. He replayed the conversation in his mind, wondering if he could have softened the goodbye, made it gentler, less permanent. But permanence was the point. He had to make her angry enough, hurt enough, disappointed enough to move on. That's the brutal psychology of self-denial. Sometimes you wound someone to save them. He hated that this would become her memory of him, not the man who loved deeply, but the one who walked away. And the thought carved deeper than any threat ever could. He reached his car and sat inside without turning the engine on. The steering wheel felt unfamiliar, like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His phone lit up once, her name on the screen, and for a second, just 1 second, he almost answered. That was the crossroads moment, the split second where destiny waits to see what kind of person you really are. He let it ring. He let it stop. He let the silence grow teeth. Because answering would have shattered the entire sacrifice, and the last kiss would no longer be the last. And deep down, he knew that loving her meant enduring this regret in silence. He finally started the engine, and the vibration felt like reality locking into place. As he drove, the city blurred past him, buildings, traffic lights, strangers living lives untouched by his collapse. He realized something painfully simple: the world doesn't pause for heartbreak. It keeps moving, indifferent and efficient. That's why pain feels isolating, because your internal storm doesn't match the calm outside. He whispered her name once, softly, like a ritual, like honoring an eternal love that could never fully die. And even though he had convinced himself this was necessary, noble even, the truth settled heavy in his chest. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of consequences neither of them were prepared for. Because while he believed he was protecting her, he had no idea what his absence was about to awaken inside her. She didn't move for a long time after the door closed, as if motion itself would confirm the goodbye was real. The apartment felt different, not emptier, but altered, like the air had shifted its loyalty. She stood there replaying the last kiss, analyzing every second the way people dissect dreams, searching for hidden meaning. Was there hesitation? Was there doubt? Was there love still alive beneath the sacrifice? That's what the mind does when destiny hits you without warning. It searches for loopholes. And in that searching, memory becomes both comfort and torture, a film that won't stop playing. She finally turned toward the mirror, and that's when she saw it, the ring he had given her, resting on the dresser like a silent witness. Now here's the detail people always skip. Objects don't cry, but they accuse. The ring wasn't flashy, but it carried weight, promises whispered, plans sketched out on lazy Sunday mornings. She picked it up slowly, as if touching it too quickly might break the fragile illusion of eternal love. Her fingers trembled, not dramatically, but subtly, the kind of tremor that reveals shock before tears arrive. She remembered the day he placed it on her hand, how he had joked nervously, how she had laughed through happy tears. That memory now felt distant and sharp at the same time, like holding glass wrapped in silk. And the worst part? She still believed in him, even as regret began creeping into her chest. She walked to the window and stared at the street, half expecting him to run back. That's the thing about heartbreak. You negotiate with reality long after reality has left the room. He'll text, she told herself. He'll realize this was a mistake. But minutes stretched into an hour, and silence started to feel deliberate. If you've ever waited for a message that never came, you know how cruel that ticking clock can be. She pressed her forehead against the glass and whispered, "Why?" Not angrily, but sincerely. And somewhere deep down, she feared the answer might be simpler than she wanted. Maybe eternal love wasn't enough. But she didn't know about the call. She didn't know about the past he had buried before he met her. From her perspective, this wasn't noble, it was abandonment dressed up as maturity. That's the psychological fracture that forms when communication dies before love does. She began revisiting small moments, late-night silences, distracted glances, that strange tension earlier that week. The mind is excellent at rewriting history once destiny shifts direction. And slowly, dangerously, she started crafting a narrative where his sacrifice wasn't protection, it was rejection. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come, quiet at first, then deeper. There's a type of crying that doesn't scream, it leaks from the soul, steady and exhausted. She clutched the ring to her chest as if it could anchor her to something stable. And here's a truth I've learned over the years. When love ends abruptly, people blame themselves first. What did I miss? She wondered. What could I have done differently? That's how regret plants itself, not always in the one who leaves, but often in the one left behind. And the irony? She was already carrying guilt for a goodbye she never chose. Night deepened, and she didn't turn on the lights. Darkness felt honest. No pretending, no forced optimism. She walked back to the dresser and carefully placed the ring exactly where it had been. Not as surrender, but as a promise, a quiet defiance against what destiny seemed to dictate. If this is truly our end, she whispered, then let memory keep it alive. Because some part of her refused to accept that their last kiss was truly the last. And while he believed he had protected her by walking away, she was about to make a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Morning didn't arrive gently, it invaded. Sunlight slipped through the curtains without permission, exposing swollen eyes, crumpled sheets, and the quiet wreckage of a night built on goodbye. She hadn't really slept, She had drifted in and out of half-dreams where the last kiss replayed like a stubborn echo. And if you've ever woken up hoping yesterday was just emotional exaggeration, you know that sharp second of clarity when you realize it wasn't. The apartment felt too organized, too calm, like the world was mocking her internal collapse. She sat up slowly, the kind of movement people make when they're afraid of what the day might demand. Because today wasn't about crying anymore, today was about choosing what her destiny would look like. She walked to the bathroom and stared at her reflection longer than usual. Not to fix her hair, not to correct mascara, but to measure strength. There's a moment after heartbreak when you either shrink or you rise, and it rarely feels heroic. It feels like standing on a thin bridge between regret and resilience. She whispered his name once, softly, and felt her chest tighten, not from weakness, but from unresolved eternal love. And then something shifted, subtle, but real. She realized that if he had the power to leave for a reason, then she had the power to uncover the truth. Now here's what most people don't do, but she did. Instead of deleting photos, instead of dramatic revenge texts, instead of pretending indifference, she chose clarity. She replayed every conversation from the past month with surgical attention. There had been stress in his eyes, hesitation in his voice, a guarded distance that didn't match their love. This wasn't emotional fading, it was concealed tension. And the more she thought about it, the more the word sacrifice started making sense in ways she hadn't allowed before. Because when someone leaves abruptly without hatred, there's usually a story underneath. She opened his old drawer, the one he rarely talked about. Not snooping, not invading, but searching for alignment between instinct and evidence. Inside were papers, receipts, old contacts, fragments of a life he had carefully folded away. She noticed a name she didn't recognize repeated twice on different documents. There was a phone number scribbled in haste. And suddenly, heartbreak felt less personal and more strategic. Her pulse quickened, not with jealousy, but with the suspicion that destiny had been manipulated. Now pause for a second, because this is where most stories go wrong. This is where pride usually says, forget him. This is where ego says, if he left, let him. But she wasn't built like that. Her love wasn't fragile, it was investigative. She believed in eternal love, not in fairy tale fantasy, but in commitment strong enough to face truth. And if there was danger hiding behind that goodbye, she wasn't going to sit safely in ignorance. She picked up her phone and stared at his contact. She didn't call. Not yet. Instead, she dialed the unfamiliar number from the paper. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Her heartbeat synced with each tone like a countdown to something irreversible. When a voice answered, calm, controlled, unfamiliar, she didn't introduce herself. She simply said, I think we need to talk about him. Silence. Heavy silence. Then a measured reply, you shouldn't be calling this number. And in that single sentence, confirmation bloomed. This wasn't abandonment, this was containment. He hadn't left because love ended. He left because something had followed him. And in that instant, her grief transformed into focus. Because if he thought his sacrifice would protect her by pushing her away, he had severely underestimated the strength of a woman fueled by memory, loyalty, and unfinished destiny. The voice on the other end didn't hang up immediately, and that alone told her everything. Danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it pauses, calculating. You care about him? The man asked, tone smooth but sharpened underneath. She didn't hesitate. Yes. There was no pride in her voice, no performance, just truth, raw and unfiltered. And sometimes truth is the most dangerous thing you can offer when destiny is already in motion. Because love makes you brave in ways logic never could. You should let him go, the man continued, almost politely. Not angry, not emotional, just certain. That certainty chilled her more than any threat would have. Is he in trouble? She asked, and even as she said it, she felt the pieces aligning. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of things unsaid. And in that silence, her mind replayed the last kiss, the trembling hands, the forced calm. That wasn't indifference. That was fear disguised as sacrifice. Here's the truth he had hidden from her. Years before he met her, he had built something fast and reckless. Money, connections, shortcuts that felt clever at the time. He wasn't violent, not by nature, But he had stepped into a world where loyalty had expiration dates. When he fell in love with her, he stepped away, clean, disciplined, committed. But the past doesn't dissolve just because you fall into eternal love. It waits. It watches. And when it knocks, it doesn't ask permission. And now that past had returned to collect emotional interest. He owes time, the voice finally said. Not money. Not favors. Time. Which meant surveillance. Control. Pressure. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him obedient. And obedience meant isolation. No attachments. No distractions. No vulnerabilities. She felt her stomach tighten as the word vulnerability echoed in her head. Because she was the vulnerability, and he had cut himself away from her to remove leverage. Now think about that for a moment. Imagine loving someone so deeply that you decide the only way to protect them is to erase yourself from their life. That's not cowardice. That's calculated pain. He had chosen to become the villain in her story to prevent her from becoming collateral in his. That's what real sacrifice looks like. Misunderstood, messy, invisible. And suddenly her regret shifted shape. It wasn't regret for losing him, it was regret for doubting his love. Is he safe? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. For now, the man answered. But he needs distance. Distance. Such a gentle word for something so brutal. She looked at the ring still resting on the dresser and understood its new meaning. It wasn't a symbol of broken destiny, it was a silent strategy. He had staged the goodbye to make it convincing. He had made sure the last kiss felt final enough that she wouldn't come looking. But he had miscalculated one thing. He assumed heartbreak would paralyze her. He underestimated what happens when eternal love meets intelligence. She wasn't naive. She wasn't fragile. She had endured loss before, family, uncertainty, setbacks, and she knew one thing about fear: it shrinks when confronted. And as she ended the call, her sadness didn't disappear, it sharpened into resolve. Because if destiny had dragged him back into darkness, then she was about to walk straight into it, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to let memory, sacrifice, and regret be the final chapter. She didn't rush out the door like it was a movie scene, no dramatic coat flying behind her, no heroic soundtrack in the background. Real life doesn't work like that. Real life gives you shaky hands, a dry mouth, and a brain screaming, "What if you're wrong?" So she moved carefully, like someone walking on cracked ice, choosing each step with intention. She grabbed her phone, her keys, and then stopped, because her eyes landed on the ring again, that quiet little circle of truth. For a second she held it, feeling its weight, letting memory speak without words, and she whispered, "I'm not letting our destiny end like this." She didn't put the ring on, not yet, because today wasn't about romance, it was about strategy and survival. And still, even in that seriousness, her lips remembered the last kiss like it had its own heartbeat. She started with the most boring place first, his routine. People skip this part, but it matters. When someone disappears emotionally, the answer is often hiding inside their habits. She drove past the coffee shop he liked, the quiet gas station he used, the corner where he'd once joked about how ugly the streetlights were. Every location carried a small memory, and every memory carried a sting of regret for not noticing sooner. Then she did what smart people do when emotions try to hijack logic. She looked for patterns. A car that seems to show up too often. A phone that goes to voicemail too fast. A friend who suddenly doesn't know anything. And by the end of the afternoon, she had the first real clue, not from a person, but from a silence that didn't feel natural. It was his old friend who finally cracked, not because he wanted to, but because guilt gets loud after enough pressure. He met her outside a small diner, the kind of place where nobody looks too closely at anyone else. He kept glancing over his shoulder like the air might report him, and right away she knew this was bigger than heartbreak. "He's not okay," the friend said, voice low, and those 3 words hit her harder than any insult. "He left me," she replied, and the friend flinched, because it sounded wrong even as she said it. "He didn't leave you," he corrected. "He ran. So they wouldn't use you." And there it was, the sacrifice she felt in her bones finally confirmed, turning her sorrow into something sharper than fear. The friend gave her an address, but not confidently, like handing someone a match near gasoline. "A warehouse area," he said. "He's been staying nearby. He's being watched." Watched. Such a simple word, but it changes the temperature in your blood. She asked the question most people avoid because they're scared of the answer, who's watching him? The friend didn't name names, just shook his head like even speaking was dangerous. Look, he said, if you go there, you can't undo it. This is the kind of destiny that doesn't let people rewind. She nodded, because she already knew, some choices aren't about comfort, they're about eternal love proving it's real. That night, she drove slow, not because she was calm, but because she needed to think. She reminded herself of something important. Fear lies by making the future feel guaranteed. It tells you, if you go, something bad will happen. It never tells you, if you don't go, something worse might happen. She parked a few blocks away, heart pounding, palms sweating, and she sat there listening to the sound of her own breathing. The street was quiet in that suspicious way, quiet like a room where people are pretending not to listen. She checked her reflection in the mirror, not for makeup, but to confirm she still looked like herself. Then she stepped out, and the cold air slapped her face like reality saying, "Welcome to the part you can't ignore." The warehouse area smelled like metal and dust and old rain, the kind of place where nothing feels safe, even the shadows. She walked with purpose, but not reckless, staying close to the edges, like her instincts were guiding her around invisible wires. And then she saw him, across the lot, leaning against a car, hood up, pretending to work on something. Except he wasn't working. He was waiting. Listening. His posture was tense, shoulders slightly raised, eyes scanning without looking obvious. This wasn't the man she knew at home, relaxed in sweatpants, laughing at dumb TV shows. This was a man who had been forced to trade tenderness for alertness, and that realization broke her heart all over again. She didn't call his name at first. She just stood there, watching, trying to fit this version of him into her memory without tearing something inside herself. Then he turned slightly, and their eyes met, and it was like the world stopped pretending. His face changed instantly. Shock first, then fear, then anger. Not at her, but at the fact that she was there. He walked fast toward her, not romantic fast, not excited fast, urgent fast, the way people move when something is about to explode. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, voice low, jaw tight. And she answered with the simplest truth, "I couldn't let our goodbye be a lie." He grabbed her arm gently but firmly and pulled her behind the car, out of sight. "You don't understand," he whispered, eyes scanning the corners, the rooftops, the parked vehicles like they were all suspects. She swallowed, then did what strong people do. She didn't argue emotion, she argued reality. "I do understand," she said. "I know about the call. I know you left because of sacrifice." His eyes widened, not because he was impressed, but because the danger now had a name between them. "You talked to them?" he asked, voice cracking just slightly, the first sign of panic slipping through his control. She nodded, and he shut his eyes like he was trying to stop time with willpower. "You had no right," he said, and that sentence carried everything. Fear, love, guilt, protection, and pure regret. She leaned closer, voice steady. "I had every right. I'm the one you're trying to protect." He shook his head hard. "You don't get it. You being here makes you leverage. And you leaving me makes me reckless," she shot back, not yelling, but firm, because she was done being treated like fragile glass. He stared at her like he didn't recognize her strength, like he had expected tears, not tactics. Then his voice softened, just a little. "That night, the last kiss. I did it because I needed you to remember me kindly." Her throat tightened. "I don't want a kind memory, I want the truth." He looked away, and for the first time she saw exhaustion in him, the kind of exhaustion that comes from living in constant calculation. He told her the parts he'd never said out loud, that he once did favors for people who didn't forgive retirement. That he tried to walk away clean, but clean exits don't exist in dirty worlds. That they weren't threatening him directly anymore, they were threatening the idea of him having someone to lose. "And you," he said, eyes shining but refusing tears, "you're my eternal love, and that's exactly why you're dangerous to my survival." She felt her anger melt into sorrow, because loving someone shouldn't make you a target. Yet here they were, two people holding hands with invisible knives pressed against their backs. And then she did something that shocked even him. She reached into her pocket and placed the ring in his palm. He froze, staring at it like it was a grenade. "This belongs to us," she whispered. Not to them. Not to your past. Not to destiny. He tried to hand it back, but she closed his fingers around it. Listen, she said, voice low but warm. I'm not here to make your life harder. I'm here because I refuse to live in a story where our goodbye is the final truth. He swallowed hard, and for a second his tough mask slipped. The man who loved her peeked through the survival version. But then his eyes flicked to the far end of the lot, and his whole body stiffened. Because someone was watching. And that's when he said, barely moving his lips, "We have to go. Right now. Not tomorrow. Not later." She didn't ask questions, because she could see it, the shift in the air, the sense that danger had just stepped closer. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a back door of the warehouse, moving fast but controlled. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear alone, from the realization that her love had dragged her into his hidden war. And as they slipped into the darkness, she heard a car door slam somewhere nearby. The sound echoed like a gunshot in her mind. And she understood, the next moment would decide whether their destiny would be tragedy or survival. Inside the warehouse, everything smelled like rust, oil, and old secrets. The air was cooler, but it didn't calm her. It sharpened her senses, like her body knew it had to become smarter fast. He moved with familiarity, guiding her through narrow corridors between stacked crates, keeping their footsteps light. "Stay close," he whispered, and it wasn't romantic, it was tactical, the way you'd guide someone through a storm. She could hear the faint hum of electricity somewhere, the distant drip of water, and the sound of her own pulse pounding like a drum. That's the part people never tell you. Danger isn't loud the way movies show, it's quiet enough that you can hear your thoughts begging. And her thoughts were screaming one thing: regret is pointless unless you use it to change something. He stopped behind a large container and peeked through a crack in a metal door. She watched his face shift, calculating, listening, weighing options. Then he turned back to her, and his eyes carried the kind of fear that only comes from loving someone too much. "I shouldn't have let you find me," he said. She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because love makes people say dumb things under pressure. "You didn't let me," she replied softly. "You tried to erase yourself. I just refused." He swallowed, and for a moment the world narrowed to just them, two hearts trapped in a situation neither of them deserved. Outside, she heard footsteps, slow, measured, not panicked. That's what made it terrifying. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They knew they had time. They knew they had control. He tightened his grip on her hand, and she felt the subtle tremor in his fingers, the same tremor from the last kiss, just sharper now. She leaned in close and whispered, "Tell me what to do." And that right there is power. Not pretending you're fearless, but trusting someone enough to follow them anyway. He nodded once, then pointed toward a back exit that led to an alley behind the building. They moved again, and as they walked, he finally spoke the truth he had been choking down for months. "It started years ago," he said, voice low, "when I thought I was smarter than consequences." He told her about the choices that seemed small at the time, introductions, favors, one job that paid too well. He told her how the money felt like freedom until it became a leash. Then he told her the real reason he left. "They said if I didn't disappear, they'd make sure you'd never look at me the same." She felt her stomach drop, because threats against reputation are still threats against life. They kill futures. "And I couldn't stand the idea of you remembering me as a monster," he added, and suddenly she understood the true sacrifice. He sacrificed her opinion of him. They reached the exit, but the alley was not empty. A car idled at the far end, headlights off, engine barely humming like a predator breathing. He froze, that instinctive stop that means the body recognized danger before the mind explained it. She felt his hand squeeze hers once, tight and urgent, and she knew he was about to make a choice. He pushed her behind a dumpster, shielding her with his body like his spine could block fate. "Don't move," he whispered, eyes scanning. And in that moment, she realized something painfully simple. This is what eternal love looks like when it's tested. Not candles and vows, but protection and fear. A door opened, and a man stepped out, silhouette first, then shape. He walked slowly, hands visible, like he wanted to appear calm, but calm is often a performance. "Come on," the man called, voice smooth. "You made this messy." Her lover didn't answer, just stared, jaw tight. The man smiled a little, like he was disappointed in a child. "You had one job. Cut the attachment." She felt her throat tighten. She was the attachment. And then, without thinking, she stepped slightly forward, and her lover hissed her name like a warning. But she wasn't trying to be heroic. She was tired of being treated like a secret. The man noticed her and tilted his head. "Well, well," he said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "So this is the reason for all the drama." Her lover's body tensed, and she could feel him preparing for something. Not violence, but negotiation, surrender, whatever kept her safe. "That's enough," her lover said, voice steady but cold. "She's not part of this." The man chuckled. "She became part of it the moment you loved her." That sentence hit her like ice, because it was true. Love creates leverage in cruel hands. And she understood that destiny wasn't mystical today. It was human greed and old mistakes. Then her lover did the one thing she wasn't ready for. He stepped out fully, away from her hiding place. He raised his hand slightly, not surrendering his soul, but offering his body as the shield. "Let her go," he said. "I'll do what you want." And she felt a wave of regret explode inside her. Not regret for loving him, but regret for not knowing sooner, for not protecting him too. She wanted to scream, no, but she forced herself to stay quiet, because survival is sometimes silence. The man took a step forward, pleased. "Good. Now we're talking." And that's when her lover turned his head just enough to look at her. One quick glance that said everything love can say without words. He mouthed, "I'm sorry. Not sorry for leaving. Sorry that love had become warfare." And the strangest thing happened. Her fear softened into a calm, because she realized she had already chosen her side. She pulled the ring from her pocket. She had kept it after all, and clutched it tight, like gripping a promise. She remembered the last kiss again, but this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a vow. If this was goodbye, she refused to let it be built on lies. So she stepped out from behind the dumpster and said, loud enough for both men to hear, "If you want to control him, you'll have to look me in the eyes too." Her lover's face snapped toward her, furious, not at her courage, but at the risk. "Stop," he whispered harshly. "Please." She shook her head, tears forming but voice steady. "No more fake endings. No more staged goodbye." The man laughed, amused. "This is sweet." And then her lover's voice cracked, just barely, when he said, "She's my eternal love. That's why I walked away." He didn't mean to confess it out loud, but pressure squeezes truth out of people. And for a split second, even the threatening man seemed surprised by the rawness of it. That confession changed the air. Because now it wasn't just business, it was personal, and personal things get unpredictable. The man's smile tightened. "That's your weakness." Her lover's eyes stayed on her, and he said softly, "No, she's the only thing that ever made me want to be better." She felt her heart shatter and rebuild in the same second, shattered by the danger, rebuilt by the love. And in that moment, she understood the tragic beauty of sacrifice. He ruined his image in her mind to protect her body in the real world. But now she was standing here, refusing the protection that required her to live without him. And that refusal was about to force destiny to choose sides. Because the man took another step, and somewhere behind them, another car quietly rolled into the alley. Two sets of footsteps now. Two shadows. Two directions. Her lover tightened his jaw and whispered, almost to himself, "This is getting worse." He looked at her one last time, and this time the look wasn't fear. It was instruction. He leaned close so only she could hear and said, "When I say run, you run. No arguing. No looking back. Promise me." She wanted to say no. She wanted to say, "Together." But she saw it, the absolute seriousness in his eyes, and she nodded, tears falling. And right as she nodded, he whispered the final dagger of love, "That night, the last kiss. I meant it like a prayer." And then he said one word, sharp and final, "Run." When he shouted "run," it wasn't dramatic, it was desperate. She didn't think. She moved. Instinct over romance. Survival over pride. Her feet hit the pavement hard, breath burning in her lungs, the alley stretching ahead like a test of destiny she never asked for. Behind her she heard shouting, not loud chaos, but sharp commands, controlled movement. She wanted to look back. Every part of her wanted to. But he had said no looking back, and sometimes love means obeying the one thing that breaks your heart. And so she ran, carrying the echo of their last kiss like a flame she refused to let die. The street ahead wasn't empty anymore. Headlights flashed on suddenly, blinding and violent. She froze for half a second, thinking it was another trap, another layer of pressure closing in. But then she heard sirens, distant at first, then louder, then undeniable. The second car in the alley hadn't belonged to the men who controlled him. It belonged to something bigger, an investigation that had been building quietly for months. The past he feared wasn't just watching him, it was being watched. And in that chaotic convergence of blue lights and shouting voices, destiny shifted its weight. Not toward tragedy, but toward exposure. She turned, just once, because now the rules had changed. Police lights painted the alley in harsh flashes of red and blue, shadows scattering, tension snapping like overstretched wire. The man who had smiled so calmly minutes before now had his hands raised, his composure cracked. And there he was, her love, standing still, hands visible, not fighting, not running. He looked at her across the chaos, and in his eyes there was no fear now, only relief. Relief that she was alive. Relief that the lie of the goodbye had been shattered. Relief that his sacrifice might not end in permanent separation after all. Officers moved fast, voices commanding, doors slamming, cuffs clicking. It wasn't cinematic perfection, it was messy, loud, human. She felt her knees weaken, adrenaline draining all at once, and she leaned against a cold brick wall. This wasn't how she imagined confronting his past. This wasn't how she imagined proving eternal love. But real love rarely unfolds under soft lighting and orchestral music. It unfolds in uncertainty, in risk, in standing still when everything around you collapses. An officer approached her gently, asking questions she barely processed. Was she hurt? Did she know these men? Had she been threatened? She answered honestly, her voice steadier now than it had been all night. Across the alley, they were speaking to him too, not as a criminal fleeing, but as someone who had been cooperating quietly. That was the final layer she hadn't known. He hadn't just endured pressure, he had been helping build the case that brought it down. His distance wasn't just sacrifice for her safety, it was strategy for both their futures. When they finally allowed him to walk toward her, escorted but unrestrained, the world felt strangely quiet. The sirens had softened, the flashing lights now background noise. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if he was allowed to close the distance. For the first time since that staged goodbye, neither of them pretended strength. He looked exhausted, vulnerable, stripped of performance. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time it wasn't an apology for leaving. It was an apology for making her carry regret she never deserved. She stepped forward slowly, closing the gap he had once forced open. "You thought I needed protection from the truth," she said softly. "I thought I needed protection from losing you," he answered. They both let out the smallest broken laugh, because that's how irony sounds when it hurts. She took the ring from her pocket, placed it back into his hand, and this time he didn't resist. "This doesn't represent a goodbye anymore," she whispered. "It represents a fight we survived." And in that simple exchange, the last kiss transformed from an ending into a vow renewed by fire. He pulled her into his arms, not urgently, not frantically, but fully. The kind of embrace that says, "I almost lost you, and I will never gamble that again." She buried her face against his chest, hearing his heartbeat steady now, grounded in the present. There were still consequences ahead, statements, court dates, rebuilding trust, repairing normal life. But consequences are different from doom. And for the first time since that night in the apartment, their destiny didn't feel like punishment. It felt like something chosen together. Later, when everything calmed and the night finally softened, they stood alone near the edge of the street. He brushed her cheek gently and said, "That night, I thought our eternal love had to end to protect you." She shook her head. "Love doesn't survive by running. It survives by standing." He nodded slowly, understanding something he hadn't before, that protection without trust becomes isolation. "And that last kiss," he said quietly, "was supposed to be goodbye." She smiled through tears. "Then let's redefine it." And she kissed him again, not frenzied, not desperate, but certain. Because sometimes destiny isn't about suffering. Sometimes it's about endurance. Sometimes sacrifice doesn't mean losing love, it means proving it under pressure. And sometimes regret becomes wisdom instead of a wound. The ring no longer sat abandoned on a dresser. The word goodbye no longer tasted permanent. And their eternal love? It didn't survive because it was easy. It survived because neither of them accepted the lie that it was over. So tell me something honestly. If you were in his place, would you have chosen the same sacrifice? Would you have walked away from your eternal love just to protect it? Or would you have stayed, even knowing destiny was closing in? And you? If someone gave you a staged goodbye, would you let them go? Or would you chase the truth like she did? Because here's what this story really leaves us with. Sometimes the last kiss isn't about ending a relationship. It's about revealing who is willing to fight for it. Sometimes regret doesn't mean you lost. It means you cared enough to risk everything. And sometimes love only proves it's real when it survives pressure, danger, and the temptation to run. Now I want to hear from you, backhand index pointing down. What song should we turn into the next emotional story? Drop the name in the comments. Let's build something powerful together. And if you want more stories where destiny, sacrifice, and eternal love collide in ways you've never seen before, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story might hit even closer to home.